Imagine you're holding the instruction manual for a massive society-saving machine.
Right, like a literal blueprint.
Exactly, a blueprint designed to pull humanity back from the brink of total collapse. But instead of reading the diagrams, or, I mean, instead of actually building the machine, you've been reading it to yourself at night like it's a book of poetry.
Oh, wow.
You know, you're waiting for the machine to magically assemble itself while you just hum the instructions as a lullaby.
It is a really jarring image, isn't it? I mean, you're holding a highly technical engineering document, but you're treating it like a mystical talisman.
Yeah, that is the exact scenario we are looking at today for this deep dive. Because for generations, people have picked up religious texts, specifically the Quran, with a very specific conditioned mindset.
A mindset of personal salvation.
Right. You read it for personal blessings. You read it to feel a sense of spiritual comfort or private peace. You read it to escape the physical mechanics of the real world. You definitely don't read it to actually engineer a society.
No, not usually.
But what if that approach isn't just slightly misguided? What if it is fundamentally structurally backward?
And that, right there, is the central, highly provocative thesis of the scholar we are exploring today, Allama G. Parwez.
Yeah.
He dedicated his entire life to a strictly rationalist, exegetical analysis of the Quran. And today we are focusing on his breakdown of Surah Al-Imran.
Specifically verses 86 through 97, right?
Yes, exactly. Now, it is absolutely crucial for us to state right at the top that Parwez's interpretations are radical departures from traditional theology.
Very radical. And we need to be clear for you listening, our mission in this deep dive isn't to endorse his political views or validate his theology.
Right, we're not taking sides here.
No, we're just acting as neutral guides, exploring his fascinating analytical framework. We want to understand how he deconstructs the traditional reading.
And how he attempts to reveal what he argues is an incredibly systematic socioeconomic constitution that's basically been hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight. I love that. So we are putting on his analytical glasses to see the text the way he saw it. And to understand Parwez's critique, we have to start with the historical problem he was trying to solve, right? He looked around at the tragic decline of the Muslim world.
The destitution, the political collapse.
Yeah, the profound societal agony. And he asked, well, why? If this text is supposed to be the ultimate guide, why are the societies that claim to follow it totally falling apart?
And his answer to that question is completely uncompromising. Parwez argues that the decline stems entirely from one massive civilizational error.
Which is?
The abandonment of a functional working social order in favor of isolated personal rituals.
Oh, interesting.
He posits that the original system was dismantled and the tools of statecraft were basically turned into empty spiritual pantomime.
Okay, let's unpack this right away because Parwez uses an absolutely brilliant analogy to explain this, and it really fundamentally shifted how I visualize this whole argument.
You mean the watch gears analogy?
The watch gears analogy, it is so good.
It perfectly captures the mechanics of his critique. Let's walk through it.
So imagine a master watchmaker builds a beautiful, highly complex mechanical watch. It has, dozens of tiny precision-cut gears, a mainspring, a balance wheel.
All of it designed to work in perfect synchronization.
Exactly. For one specific purpose, which is to tell time. Now, imagine someone comes along, cracks open the casing, takes the watch completely apart, and scatters all those little gears and springs across a wooden table.
Right, but the components are all still there. They haven't ceased to exist.
Right.
You haven't lost a single piece of the watch.
But if you stand over that table, staring at a loose gear and a disconnected spring, and you ask, hey, what time is it?
You're going to be waiting a very long time for an answer.
A very long time. Those gears cannot tell time unless they are assembled into a unified system. And Parwez argues that this is precisely what has happened to the concepts in this text.
Yeah, that performing isolated rituals, like praying or fasting, while living under a contradictory, exploitative economic system, is like picking up one of those scattered gears.
Polishing it, admiring it.
Right, polishing it and expecting it to tell you the time. That is the core of his thesis right there.
It's such a striking visual.
In his analytical framework, you cannot take a component of a statecraft system, say a daily assembly or a welfare mechanism, and strip it of its socioeconomic function.
Right, you can't perform it in a vacuum.
Exactly. You can't perform it in a vacuum and then wonder why your society is still collapsing. The gears only have value when they are actively driving the machine.
Once you scatter them, they become mere artifacts.
And Parwez asserts that you can polish those artifacts, you can revere them, you can chant over them for centuries.
But until you assemble the machine, they will never tell time again. So the natural question for me is, how did the watch get taken apart in the first place? Like, if this text was originally an assembled machine, how did we get to a point where millions of people are just staring at loose gears on a table?
It's a great question.
How do you translate a comprehensive civilizational blueprint back into a purely personal religious feeling?
To answer that, we have to look at the most crucial tool in Parwez's entire methodology, which is linguistics.
Ah, right.
Specifically, he focuses on how the actual definitions of the vocabulary in the text drifted and mutated over centuries.
Which makes, I mean, language is a living thing. The English we speak today is vastly different from the English of Shakespeare.
Let alone Old English.
Yeah, let alone Old English. Words that meant something highly technical 1,000 years ago can easily soften into something completely different now.
And that phenomenon is central to his work. Parwez compiled an exhaustive lexicon called the Lughat ul-Quran, where he traces the vocabulary back to its physical root meanings in classical Arabic. And he argues that the drift in meaning wasn't just accidental linguistic evolution.
But it was intentional.
He argues it was a systemic ideological shift. It was the shift from din to mazhab. And we are going to see this fundamental clash over and over in these verses.
Let's lay down the definitions for those two terms right now. Because if we don't understand the difference between din and mazhab, the rest of Parwez's framework isn't going to make any sense.
No, it won't.
Traditionally, both of those words are often just loosely translated into English as religion.
They are, which Parwez views as a tragic mistranslation. In his lexicon, din and mazhab are polar opposites. They are entirely different paradigms of human existence.
Okay, so define din for us.
He defines din as a working socioeconomic system of life. It is a tangible political and economic order governed by a specific set of immutable laws.
So it's practical.
Very practical. It is statecraft, it is jurisprudence, it is the actual mechanics of running a society where resources are distributed equitably.
So going back to the analogy, din is the assembled watch.
Yes. Din is the machine functioning as intended.
And mazhab.
In Parwez's framework, mazhab is ritualistic religion. It is driven by emotionalism, by personal devotion, by the desire for individual salvation in the afterlife.
So it's inward focused.
Completely inward focused. It is characterized by waiting for hidden saviors or supernatural miracles to fix the world, rather than, rolling up your sleeves and engineering a solution yourself.
And let me guess, this is where a specific class of people comes in.
Spot on. Parwez notes that most critically, mazhab is almost always overseen by a priesthood class.
A hierarchy of clergy.
Right. Clergy who benefit from keeping the masses focused on personal rituals rather than demanding systemic economic justice.
So if din is the assembled watch, mazhab is the priesthood telling you to just keep polishing the scattered gears and praying that the time reveals itself.
That is exactly how he frames it. Now let's look at how this linguistic shift from din to mazhab totally alters the reading of the text. Take a very common word found in Surah Al-Imran, tawbah.
Oh, this is a perfect example. Traditionally, tawbah is almost universally translated as repentance, right?
It is. In the realm of mazhab, in the ritualistic view, tawbah is a verbal and emotional act.
Like saying you're sorry.
Yeah. Suppose you do something wrong. You feel remorse. You sit on a prayer mat and you chant a phrase asking for forgiveness, like astaghfirullah, hundreds of times while crying.
You are basically seeking a spiritual pardon from an angry deity.
Exactly. But when Parwez applies the physical root linguistic definition of the word, it completely strips away the emotionalism.
It changes the concept entirely, right?
It does. Parwez points out that the physical root of the Arabic word twb doesn't mean to feel sorry or to cry.
Okay.
It literally means to halt your momentum on a destructive path, to physically turn around and to retrace your steps back to the correct destination.
Wow.
It is not an emotional state. It is a structural, physical course correction.
I love the analogy for this because it makes it so practical. Let's say I'm driving down the highway at 80 miles an hour, and suddenly I realize I'm going in the completely wrong direction. I am heading directly towards a cliff. Under the traditional mazhab definition, tawbah would be me sitting in the driver's seat, keeping my foot slammed on the gas pedal and just crying.
Just weeping at the wheel.
Yeah, weeping and saying, I'm sorry to the passengers in the back seat, while still doing 80 towards the cliff.
And Parwez would point out that if you do that, you are still going to drive off the cliff. The laws of physics do not care about your verbal apologies.
Your tears won't stop the car.
Exactly.
Right. Real tauba, systemic tauba, means taking your foot off the gas.
Yeah.
It means slamming the brakes, taking the nearest exit, and physically steering the car back the other way.
You have to change the direction.
You don't even have to shed a single tear as long as you
Yeah.
change the direction of the vehicle.
And when you apply that definition to a collapsing society, which is the historical context of the verses we're exploring in Surah Al-Imran, the implications are massive.
It changes everything about how you govern.
It does. If a nation is tumbling into economic ruin, poverty, and corruption because of an exploitative economic system, chanting words of forgiveness while continuing to operate that exact same economic system is utterly meaningless.
Nature will basically reject that apology.
Exactly. Parwez argues that true societal salvation requires practical, structural realignment. You have to physically dismantle the flawed system before you hit the point of no return.
Which brings us to another massive linguistic redefinition in his work, the concepts of haq and ayat bayanat.
Oh, these are vital to his framework. Haq is universally translated as truth.
With a capital T.
Right. But we have to ask, what kind of truth? In the context of Greek philosophy, which heavily influenced later theological interpretations, truth became this highly abstract theoretical concept.
Like you sit in a room, you debate logic, you ponder the nature of existence.
Yeah, I think therefore I am. That kind of abstract philosophical truth, it lives entirely in your head.
But Parwez looks at the Quranic lexicon and argues that haq is not an abstract philosophy at all, right?
Not at all. In this text, haq is an engineering reality. It is a truth that is manifested exclusively through tangible, constructive, and observable results in the physical world.
So it has to be measurable.
Yes. He calls it the law of tangible proof.
And how does that connect to ayat bayanat?
Well, traditionally, ayat bayanat is translated as clear signs, or just verses of the book.
Okay.
But in Parwez's systemic lexicon, bayanat are the undeniable physical proofs of a functioning socioeconomic system. They are the landmarks of success.
Ah, I see.
And ayat bayanat isn't just a beautifully written sentence. It is a society where there is no poverty. It is an observable fact.
The analogy in the sources for this really struck me. It's like a medical prescription.
It's the perfect way to understand his metric for truth.
Yeah.
Let's say you are deathly ill and a doctor writes you a prescription.
Okay.
You don't look at the piece of paper and say the prescription is true just because the chemical formula is written in elegant calligraphy.
Right.
Or because the doctor spoke beautifully when handing it to you.
Or because you memorized the words on the prescription and recited them 100 times a day.
Exactly.
That's the mazhab approach, right? Valuing the artifact over its function.
Precisely. The prescription is only proven true. It only achieves the status of haq when you actually swallow the medicine and it physically cures the disease in your body.
It has to work.
It has to work. In the same way, Parwez argues that a system of governance or economics is only divine, only haq, if it practically and measurably eliminates human misery.
If it doesn't cure the patient.
Right. If the society claiming to follow this text remains impoverished, backward, and humiliated, then, according to Parwez's reading, one of two things is happening.
Which are?
Either the prescription itself is false, or you aren't actually taking the medicine, you are just eating the paper.
I mean, that is a brutal metric.
Very brutal.
It completely removes the psychological comfort of saying, well, our economy is in shambles, our infrastructure is failing, and there's massive inequality, but hey, at least we hold the spiritual truth in our hearts.
Yes, Parwez is saying, no, if your society is visibly failing, you do not possess the truth.
He argues that you might possess the document that contains the truth, but you have fundamentally failed to apply the cure.
Exactly. The truth hasn't manifested.
Okay, so if the validity of the system is judged by its observable ability to literally eliminate human misery, what is the actual mechanism driving that cure?
That's the logical next question.
If tauba means hitting the brakes on a collapsing society, what exactly are we hitting the brakes on? What is the engine driving us off the cliff, and what engine is Parwez suggesting we install instead?
This leads us right into the core of his analysis of Surah Al-Imran. We are moving from the theory of the system to its actual gears.
Let's get into the mechanics.
Parwez calls the socio-economic engine of this blueprint the Nizam-Ububiyat.
The system of providence. Let's define Rububiyat for the listener.
Rububiyat is the concept of universal nourishment and development. It is the idea that the system must provide the physical and developmental necessities for every single human being to reach their full potential.
From birth to death.
From birth to death, without exception. If a society is dying of poverty and inequality, The disease is wealth hoarding.
And the medicine.
The medicine, the gear that makes the Nizami Rububiyat turn, is a concept called infaq.
Let's dig into the linguistic root of infaq, because the visual imagery here is fascinating. We have to talk about the hemyan.
The hemyan. Yeah, this is a great visual. The hemyan is a traditional leather money pouch. In ancient times, a merchant in the marketplace would tie this pouch around his waist to hold his coins.
So picture this pouch. A hoarder, someone operating under what we would modernly call a purely capitalist accumulation mindset, takes that leather pouch, puts their money in, and ties one end completely shut.
Right.
Wealth flows in from their business, drops into the top of the pouch, and it just stays there. The pouch gets heavier and heavier.
And that is the physical manifestation of hoarding. The wealth stagnates.
But Parwez points out that the root word for infaq represents the exact opposite physical state, right?
Yes. Infaq means keeping that pouch open at both ends.
So it's not a vault, it's a conduit, it's a pipeline.
That is the perfect distinction. In a system based on infaq, wealth flows in through your earnings at the top, but it continuously flows out the bottom for the benefit of humanity.
It never stops moving.
Never. Infaq is not a passive, occasional act of charity that you do once a year to feel good about yourself. It is an active, continuous state of economic circulation.
And Parwez connects this directly to the verses, right?
He does. According to his analysis of verse 3.92, a society simply cannot attain prosperity, which the text calls kushadagi, as long as individuals are tying the pouch shut.
Now, here's where Parwez's framework gets really controversial.
Theory.
Because when we talk about wealth distribution and charity in this specific religious context, the immediate assumption for millions of people is, oh, you mean zakat, the 2.5% charity tax.
Yes, that is the default assumption.
But the sources show that Parwez presents a blistering structural critique of that exact concept. And I want to emphasize, again, for you listening, that we are exploring his analytical lens here, not taking a stance on modern Islamic finance.
Right, neutral ground.
But his logic is fascinating.
It is arguably his most radical departure from traditional interpretation. And we must frame his argument carefully to understand his systemic logic.
Okay, let's hear it.
He argues that reducing the vast revolutionary economic system of the Quran down to a fixed 2.5% tax is actually a mathematical loophole.
A loophole designed by later generations.
Yes, designed to protect extreme wealth.
Like, break down the math on that, because when you say it out loud, it really makes you pause. How does a charity tax protect wealth?
Well, think about it. In the traditional mazhab view, if you have hoarded wealth, say a mountain of gold, silver, or modern fiat currency, you are required to calculate its value and give 2.5% of it away to the poor annually.
Right, that's the standard practice.
Parwez argues that the psychological and legal effect of this is profound. Once you perform that specific calculation and hand over that tiny fraction, the remaining 97.5% of your hoard is suddenly considered completely purified.
Wow.
It is declared halal wa tayyib, absolutely lawful, holy, and yours to keep forever, no matter how much society is suffering around you.
Let me play devil's advocate here, or rather, let me voice the traditional perspective. Zakat is considered a foundational pillar. It's meant to encourage generosity. How does Parwez justify calling it a loophole?
He justifies it by looking at the systemic outcome. Look at the math from the perspective of an empire builder.
Okay.
If I am a billionaire and I give away $25 million, that sounds like a massive act of charity.
It does. It's a huge PR win.
Exactly. But I get to keep $975 million, and not only do I keep it, but the religious establishment gives me a stamp of approval.
They tell you God is happy with you.
Right, saying the divine creator is perfectly happy with my near billion-dollar hoard because I paid my 2.5% toll. Parwez argues that this framework provides a divine justification for extreme wealth concentration.
So in his view, this is essentially a capitalist accumulation model that has just put on a religious mask.
Exactly.
It tells the wealthy elite that their empires of capital are completely safe from systemic redistribution as long as they toss a 2.5% crumb to the starving masses.
That's exactly it. And Parwez claims that Surah Al-Imran aggressively rejects this mathematical compromise. He points directly to the text itself.
What does the text say?
When the question is posed in the Quran regarding infaq, what should they spend? The answer giving is not a percentage. It's not 2.5%. The specific Arabic term used is al-afa.
Al-afu. What is the literal translation of that in his lexicon?
It means total surplus. It means everything beyond your basic personal needs.
Wait, everything?
Everything. This is the uncompromising gear of the Nizami Rububiyat.
That is wild.
The principle of universal providence demands that for a society to function equitably, no individual can sit on mountains of stagnant capital while another human being starves.
So what happens to the surplus?
Therefore, the societal system legally requires you to surrender al-af, your entire surplus, to the central system so that the flow of resources nourishes everyone.
I need to pause you there because that is a massive paradigm-shifting claim.
It really is.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the psychological resistance to this. If I'm understanding his framework correctly, this isn't just, hey, be a little more generous.
No, not at all.
This is a complete dismantling of the concept of private wealth hoarding. Under this system, if I need a house, clothes, food, basic comforts, tools for my trade.
That's yours. That's your need.
Right, that's mine. But the moment I start piling up excess wealth, buying my fourth luxury home, hoarding millions in offshore accounts, Parwez is saying that under this specific civilizational blueprint, all of that surplus legally belongs to the society.
That is precisely what he is arguing. Because if you hoard it, you are tying the pouch shut. And as we established with the Hemian analogy, tying the pouch shut is the economic disease that kills the society.
You can't just tax the disease.
Exactly. You cannot cure the disease of hoarding by taxing it at 2.5%. You cure it by legally mandating that the pouch remain permanently open at the bottom. The surplus must flow.
Now, human nature being what it is, I can immediately hear someone saying, okay, but why not a compromise? This sounds too extreme.
Yeah.
Surely we don't have to give up all our surplus. Can a society have a mixed economy, like a little bit of free market accumulation, a little bit of wealth hoarding, mixed with a robust system of infaq and charity on the side?
That is a very natural human impulse to try and find the middle ground between what we want to keep and what we are told to give.
Right.
But this brings us to what Parwez identifies as the law of exclusivity and the inherent danger of a concept called piwansazi.
Tiwansazi, meaning patchwork.
Yes, ideological patchwork. It refers to the attempt to stitch an exploitative, human-made economic system together with a divine label. In Parwez's analytical framework, this is a mechanical impossibility. It is guaranteed to fail because truth hack cannot be blended with falsehood.
The sources use a really visceral chemical analogy for this, the pure milk and the acid. Let's explore that.
Oh, it's a great analogy. Imagine you have a large pot of incredibly pure, nourishing milk.
Okay.
This represents the divine socioeconomic framework, the din. It is designed to nourish the entire society. Now, suppose you take just one single drop of acid.
Just one drop.
Just one. That drop represents falsehood, or in this context, the exploitative principle of wealth hoarding. If you drop that single bead of acid into the pot of milk,
what happens?
the whole pot curdles. It's ruined. You don't have 99% pure milk and 1% acid. You have a pot of spoiled, undrinkable liquid. And that is Parwez's view on mixed economies claiming to be divine. You cannot say, well, we'll keep the core industries as private, monopolized property and we'll allow billionaires to exist, but we'll call it an Islamic system because we collect a small charity tax on the side.
The acid has already curdled the milk.
Exactly.
I want to add another analogy here to bring it back to the machine metaphor we started with. Trying to mix a capitalist hoarding engine with a socialist distribution chassis is like putting square tires on a Ferrari.
Right.
It's not just that the Ferrari won't go as fast. It's that the gears of one system will actively destroy the mechanics of the other. They are incompatible paradigms.
Completely incompatible.
A system that relies on the pouch being tied shut cannot be merged with a law that demands the pouch be open. The machine will tear itself apart.
That is an excellent way to visualize piwansazi. The friction will destroy the society.
So if this blueprint is so clear about al-afro, giving the total surplus, and so explicit about the mechanical failure of patchwork systems, how on earth did the message get so obscured?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
How did a society go from surrender all your surplus to save humanity to just give 2.5% and keep the rest? Who changed the manual?
To answer that, Parwez directs us to verses 3.93 and 3.94, which deal with the historical role of the priesthood class.
What the text calls abar wa ruban.
Yes.
And what's fascinating here is how he interprets their methodology. Because the text shows that the distraction isn't usually a direct secular denial of the truth. It's a misdirection.
It's an illusion.
Right.
It's the ultimate sleight of hand. Consider the power dynamics. If a religious class is aligned with the wealthy elite, If they rely on the patronage of those who hoard the 97.5%, they simply cannot afford for the masses to read this text as a socioeconomic revolution.
No, because then the gravy train stops.
Exactly. If the masses realize the text demands a lafo, the elite lose their wealth and the priesthood loses their patrons. So they must turn the text back into a mazhab, a religion of petty rules.
And the specific example Parwez pulls from the text to illustrate this distraction is almost darkly comical. The story of Prophet Jacob and the camel meat.
Oh, this is such a clear example. Let's set the scene for this.
Please do.
Historically, there was an intense theological debate among the traditional priesthood of the time. They raised a massive fuss, arguing endlessly over dietary laws.
Right.
Specifically, they claimed that certain foods, like camel meat, were universally forbidden by God. And their primary evidence was that Prophet Jacob, who is also known as Israel, didn't eat those foods.
So Jacob, a historical figure, didn't eat camel meat. I mean, maybe he just didn't like the taste.
Maybe it gave an indigestion.
Right, maybe he was allergic to it. It was, for all intents and purposes, a mundane personal dietary preference.
That is exactly Parwez's point. A prophet's personal, physical dislike for a specific food item is just that, a personal choice. But the priesthood took that mundane personal choice and elevated it into a permanent, universal divine law.
They blew it totally out of proportion.
They created massive, society-wide theological disputes over it. Is this meat lawful? Is it unlawful? Will eating it damn our souls to hell? They wrote volumes of literature debating the spiritual implications of camel meat.
And here is the million-dollar question. While everyone in the society is fiercely debating the spiritual implications of eating meat, what aren't they paying attention to?
They are completely ignoring the economic oppression happening right under their noses.
The zulm.
The zulm, the hoarding of wealth, the starvation of the poor. By obsessing over micro-rituals and fabricated dietary debates, the priesthood successfully distracts the masses from establishing an equitable state.
It's brilliant in a very dark, cynical way.
It really is.
If I am a corrupt elite and I can get you to spend all your intellectual energy arguing over whether you should fold your hands on your chest or let them hang by your sides during a prayer, or whether a specific type of animal fat is holy or unholy.
You'll be too busy.
Right. You will never have the energy, the time, or the clarity to ask me why I own 50 acres of land while you can't afford bread.
That is the core of Parwez's critique of Abar Waruban. He views these obsessive debates over micro-rituals not as genuine piety, but as a deliberate mechanism of social control designed to protect macroeconomic monopolies.
It takes the vast, society-altering constitution of the Quran and shrinks it down into a book of trivial behavioral policing.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established the engine, infaq and alaflan, the total flowing of surplus, and we've seen how that engine was intentionally broken by patchwork compromises and deliberate priesthood distractions.
Right.
Now we have to look at the consequences. What is the unavoidable scientific result for a society that keeps that money pouch tied shut?
This brings us to what Parwez calls the social physics of the text, the law of requital.
And once again, we had to look at his lexicon to redefine some very scary-sounding Arabic words, lanat and azahab.
Yes.
Normally, if you pick up an English translation, these are translated as curse and punishment.
Yes, and in a traditional mythological reading, a curse means an anthropomorphic god is angry at you and magically strikes you with bad luck or sickness. And punishment usually implies the fires of hell, deferred to the afterlife after you die.
But in the systemic lexicon of Parwez, we are leaving the realm of magic and entering the realm of physics.
Entirely. In his framework, the law of requital is just as immutable as the law of gravity. It is cause and effect.
So what is lanat then?
Lanat does not mean magical bad luck from the sky. It literally means being practically deprived of the constructive use of natural forces.
Let's expand on that. Deprived of natural forces, what does that look like for a nation?
It means your society has lost its ability to innovate. It means your infrastructure is crumbling, your scientific advancement has stalled, and you cannot harness the resources of your own land.
Wow.
You are alienated from the physical blessings of the natural world because your system is too corrupt to utilize them.
So it's gravity, not a curse. If you build a bridge with cheap, corrupt materials, the bridge collapses. That's lanat.
Exactly.
And what about azab?
Parwez argues that azab is not just a threat deferred to some distant afterlife. In this socioeconomic framework, azab is the agonizing humiliation, destruction, and destitution experienced by a society in this world.
In the here and now.
Yes. It is a nation losing its sovereignty. It is a society having to beg other nations for basic resources, for predatory loans, for food aid.
That's a grim picture.
That public humiliation, that loss of dignity, that is the systemic punishment for abandoning the economic engine of equity.
So what does this all mean for a collapsing society? Because verse 3.91 paints an incredibly vivid, terrifying picture of the endpoint of this process.
Yes, the concept of the earth full of gold.
The earth full of gold. Tell us about that.
This is one of the most powerful systemic observations in Parwez's reading of the text. Verse 3.91 essentially states that if a society reaches the point of systemic death due to extreme wealth hoarding and exploitation, no amount of hoarded capital can ransom it. Even if you possess gold equal to the weight of the entire earth, it would not save you from the collapse.
Let's really visualize that scenario. You have a society where the elite have successfully won the capitalist game. They have hoarded everything.
The pouch is tied shut.
The pouch is tied totally shut. As a result, the masses are starving, the infrastructure is completely crumbling, and innovation has stopped because all the resources are sitting stagnant in underground vaults.
Right, it's all locked away.
The society begins to actively collapse. You have riots, famine, vulnerability to invasion, total systemic death. And at that final, desperate moment, the billionaires open their vaults and say, wait, look at all this gold. We have trillions of dollars.
We can buy our way out of this.
You can pay for salvation.
And the law of social physics, the law of requital, says
No,
you cannot. Because wealth only has protective value when it is actively circulating within a living, functioning system.
Think about it materially.
Right. Gold is just a soft, yellow, shiny metal. You cannot eat it.
It cannot physically hold up a crumbling bridge.
It cannot negotiate with a starving mob. Once the social order starves to death, accumulated capital becomes completely and utterly useless.
It's a profound irony, isn't it? The paradox of hoarding. The very act of hoarding the gold to protect yourself is the exact mechanism that starves the society to death.
Exactly.
And once the society is dead, the gold you hoarded to protect yourself becomes worthless because there is no society left to give that gold any value.
It is the ultimate fatal flaw of the hoarding mindset. Salvation, systemic survival, requires the active, continuous circulation of wealth during the society's lifespan.
Not after it's too late.
Exactly. It requires the constant flow of infect. It does not accept a massive payout when the system is already flatlining. You cannot bribe the laws of nature.
Okay, so if the goal is to keep the wealth circulating, to implement Al-Afa and ensure all our surplus flows into the societal system to prevent this collapse, where exactly does it go? Who is catching this wealth? Who is responsible for distributing it so that no human goes hungry?
That is the crucial missing piece of the puzzle. You cannot have a systemic global economy without a central coordinating mechanism.
Right, you can't just throw your surplus out the window and hope it helps someone.
Exactly. And in verses 3.95 through 3.97, Parwez argues that the text explicitly defines this central authority. It is called the markaz.
And to understand the markaz, we have to redefine two of the most famous, globally recognized symbols in the world.
Yes.
The Kaaba and the Maqam Ibrahim.
Let's start with how they are traditionally viewed in the realm of mazhab, the ritualistic perspective.
Right. Traditionally, universally, the Kaaba is known as the black stone cube in the city of Mecca.
Millions of people visit it every year.
Yeah, for ritual pilgrimage, to walk around it, to touch it, to pray toward it. The Maqam Ibrahim is literally viewed as a specific stone located nearby that allegedly bears the physical, miraculous footprints of the Prophet Abraham.
That is the artifact-based ritualistic view. But remember our rule for this deep dive.
Translate back to systemic concepts.
Exactly. Translating religious concepts back into systemic engineering concepts using Parwez's lexicon. In his framework, the Kaaba is not meant to be just a stone structure for passive rituals.
Okay, so what is it?
It represents the Markazi Masas, the tangible central authority.
So it's not just a tourist destination or a place to visit for spiritual points. It's a headquarters. It is an administrative hub.
Exactly. It is the administrative epicenter of the divine socioeconomic system. It acts as the international convener.
Interesting.
Its intended purpose is not to host empty rituals, but to be the central hub that collects the alaf, the surplus wealth of the nations, and coordinates its distribution.
Guaranteeing the basic needs, the rububiyat of all mankind.
Yes, it is the central gear of the watch.
And the Maqam Ibrahim, if Parwez argues it isn't literally a rock with footprints on it, what is it?
The word maqam means station or status. In the context of din, of statecraft, Allama G represents the station of universal human leadership.
Oh, wow.
The phrase he uses is "Imano fi insani."
Universal leadership. Not tribal, not national, not sectarian. Universal.
Yes, the text explicitly links this philosophical station to Abraham because, in this framework, Abraham is presented as the founder of a non-sectarian system meant to unite humanity beyond geographical, racial, and linguistic boundaries.
The goal of his blueprint was to transcend these petty human divisions.
Exactly.
So let's synthesize the big picture here. In Parwez's reading, the Kaaba is the administrative center, the physical markaz, and the Maqam Ibrahim is the philosophy of universal leadership operating out of that center.
Spot on.
Their combined structural purpose is to ensure that the laws of adl, justice, and rububiyat providence flow outward to nourish every single human being on the planet.
That is the blueprint. That is the fully assembled watch telling perfect time.
Oh, yeah.
A society that entirely rejects the hoarding mechanics of capitalism, continuously circulates its surplus wealth, al-afru, into a central unified global authority, the markaz, which then distributes it to ensure no human being anywhere suffers from deprivation.
Wow. When you lay it out like that, step by step, gear by gear, it is light years away from just reciting verses in a dark room for personal blessings.
It's a completely different universe.
It is an incredibly demanding, highly structured political, economic, and social constitution.
It is immensely demanding. And that is what Parwez identifies as the permanent value of these specific verses in Surah Al-Imran.
The permanent value.
His ultimate conclusion is that true societal salvation cannot be achieved through magical thinking, emotional weeping, or minor charitable gestures like a 2.5% tax.
It requires action.
It requires tauba, which we now know means massive structural action and real physical course correction.
And in fact.
And it requires, in fact, the continuous, unending circulation of resources, completely dismantling the ritualistic excuses that allow the elite to hoard the world's wealth while the masses starve.
And you, listening to this deep dive right now, take a step back from the ancient history and the Arabic terminology and think about how this framework applies to the mechanics of your own life, your own community, or even your corporate organization.
Absolutely.
Are you applying Piwansazi? Are you using patchwork solutions? Maybe a little bit of exploitation in your business practices mixed with a little bit of philanthropy on the weekend, and wondering why the overall system is still failing?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you sitting on hoarded resources, tying the pouch shut, while hoping that verbal apologies or a good PR campaign will fix a fundamentally broken structure? Parwez's challenge is universal. You cannot fix a broken machine by chanting at it.
And if we connect this challenge to the bigger picture of human history, this raises a vitally important, highly critical question.
Which is?
Well, we now know the blueprint, according to this rationalist school. We know that economic hoarding leads to systemic death. We know the markaz is meant to act as the pure central authority, catching that surplus and distributing it equitably to all humanity.
Right, it sounds like the perfect incorruptible system on paper.
But systems, even supposedly divine ones, are run by human beings. What happens when the very people tasked with running the markaz, the administrators of this global equity, the leaders stationed at the Maqam Ibrahim, become corrupted by the allure of the tied pouch?
Oh, that's dangerous.
What happens when the central authority itself begins to hoard the al-afwi instead of distributing it? How does this civilizational blueprint account for internal decay and human greed at the highest levels?
Oof. That is the ultimate vulnerability, isn't it? The system might be flawless, but the operators are flawed. Who watches the watchers?
Exactly.
Well, you are going to have to mull that over on your own because that exact tension, the battle between the pure blueprint and corrupt human administration, sets the stage perfectly for the next deep dive in this series.
It certainly does.
We've seen how the blueprint is supposed to work. Next time, we'll see how it defends itself against the human element. Until then, keep untying the pouch.